spouse is just not working on her computer, so she's trying to get into the minutes here.
Okay. You have it in your packets, though?
Yep.
So I'll go ahead and start, and we'll just roll along. So just like last year, I even pulled up last year's memo and doctored it up, changed dates, and did change verbiage too, of course, for you. But you'll see in here, we do have the budget document, the Excel spreadsheets. This is actually what we work off with when we prepare that. It shows 21 actual, 22 budget, the 23 levy board is what we're saying, because this goes through the city's tax levy committee, which is made up of the mayor, council member Fish, and then Sandy, myself, Andrew Bremseth. So we put the budget together. So the Port Authority budget is running through that process as well. But if you'll recall, we do come to you to have you actually approve requesting a levy of the city, and that's what I'm here requesting tonight. So we start out seeing that the property tax within that, we're keeping it stable from 22 to 23, so keeping that at a $60,000 request. So that's my recommendation to you if you're comfortable keeping that as we go through. Other revenues in the budget, I do put some investment earnings in there, but I will tell you, the city as a whole, we pool all our investments together. We're required to mark our investments to the market value. That's a governmental accounting standards board requirement. A private business, you wouldn't have to recognize those unrealized gains and losses, but we have to do that every month, so we book those in. We've had some nice years in the past of recognizing those gains in the value. We're giving some of that back this year. As interest rates are rising, and of course just this last month took a 3/4 jump up, which means our portfolio is going to take a bit of a slide backwards then. But it's a long-term portfolio. We hold things for a longer period of time, so hopefully that will swing around. We do show a use of the fund balance in here of $70,203, and I'll say on the front end, that's basically, we're using that to make some of those dairy payments. If you recall last year, you as a port approved using some cash balance to make the payments on the loans, the demo loan and the revolving loan fund for the dairy property. The first payments are actually due today, so we actually made those by wire today. The second payment is February of 2023. You, as a port, approved making those first two payments because it relates to levy year 2022. You collect your taxes through January of 23, make that final payment in February of 23, really from your revenues of 22. It's a little confusing, therefore the budgets aren't always going to match that analysis, but because I have to show those in the budget when they're actually being made. Then we have rent in the budget of $238,490. $215,000 of that is for the Community Behavioral Health Hospital that we own and lease to the state of Minnesota. They cover all the costs. We reconcile those operating costs annually, and they provide funds for capital maintenance on that building that we're holding. We basically use them then on the state's directive on projects they want to do out there. But really, the Port Authority is, facilitated, just acted as a facilitator or holder of that building, and that's working really well, keeping those services in Fergus.
And that revenue is just cost-based, so.
It's what?
It's cost-based, so here's what it takes to run the facility.
Right, cost-based plus then putting like $10,000, $11,000 a month into that capital fund,
okay.
and then building that up, and then we'll take, a big chunk out of it if you do a roof or do a parking lot and things like that.
Thank you.
The remainder of the rent, $23,407, is farmland rental. It comes from a farmer, and then also out at the racetrack when they lease a portion of that property out there for the race out there. So that brings us total sources of just about $380,000. The expense side of it, the first section under economic development and assistance, this is the general operations of the port. And basically you have a proportion of Jill's salary and Clara's salary charged in there. So we have wages and benefits, we have some professional services there. If we have to do a study or something, not much in there, but $5,000, and then paying property taxes out at $10,000. The next section of the expenses is the CBHH facility, and I do make that match the revenue side. So we show the in and the out, knowing we probably won't spend all those expenses that are in the building repair and maintenance, and then that's what gets accumulated in a restricted fund balance that we track for the state of Minnesota. And then the operating transfers out, that is the money going out to make those dairy loan payments. So you can see $22,512 is in 2022. That's the payments we're making right now. And then the $65,950 is the February 23 payments. And then that will have fulfilled the obligation. You actually approved more than that last year. But as you recall, when we talked last month, we were not able to completely draw down the demolition loan. And we haven't quite sorted that all out yet as far as making up that gap on the dairy project. But the loan due back to the state is less than the total. Therefore, the debt service payments are less. So that is the budget. And then I did put the financial statements in here again. I don't think they really changed, maybe a little bit on the what's restricted for that CBHH facility, because we allocated some of those investment downgrades or the loss in value then to the state as well. I don't really have to go through those unless you have questions on that, but I did put in a projected cash balance sheet that looks like this in your packet with the highlights. A lot of detail. I kind of wanted to do it on a one line item, but we'll talk through it a bit. And if I start getting too much in the weeds, say stop.
Before you do that, could you
Yep.
show us where the 100,000 went from the restricted, or estimated repairs? Is that
Oh, that,
sheet someplace?
the 100,000 that's in the building repairs and maintenance.
Exactly, yeah.
So what's your question in relation?
Yeah, where does it go? Because that gets poked over here. Then, oh, this is the actual, so it would be next year.
So that's what we're budgeting for '23. And if they don't spend it, then it basically closes into a reserve fund balance or like a savings account. And then that shows up on the balance sheet. So not in the P&L, but
Yeah, which account would it show up in on the balance?
on the balance sheet. You don't have the balance sheet here. Let's go over to the financial statements. So in your packet, if you see the balance sheet that just looks like this, that is the restricted for renewal and replacement, the middle fund balance that currently is $522,930.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry, it took me a bit to get my understanding
Oh, no,
there.
you just mentioned this, right? Okay, where?
Yep.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions on the financial statements themselves? Would you like me to breeze through those a bit or leave them where they're at? Yes, you have them. But I do want to talk through the cash balances a bit because it brings up a point of discussion. What you have here in front of you has 2018 through 2024. I could start dropping off some of the older years and lengthen this out a bit more, but so for 2022, I'm projecting that we'll end the year in the Port Authority with $226,745. So what in that yellow highlighted line you can see. And what's happening there, we're starting at the top of that page of $412,000. We have some money coming in from the state for those remaining funds on the demo loan and the revolving loan fund coming in. We have operating budget going out, and then we have payments going over to the capital project fund, which the city has upfronted all the costs of the dairy, and that's sitting over in our city capital project fund. We hold the asset in the Port Authority as land held for resale, and we make up the difference between the two, saying as a liability and a receivable. So the port, we owe you this money. The city, we have a receivable from the port for that. That's how we're offsetting that. We have the current year debt service payments that you approved previously, that $50,000 and a $32,000. We also did build in here a $20,000 payment for the engineering report on the Norgan property, which is your next item on your agenda tonight. So we did build that in here to give you a frame of reference of how this looks with the cash. And then showing, keeping the levy stable at 60,000. Also moving over to the project fund, I haven't moved it yet, but you remember when we sold the crushed material from the dairy site to Carlton? That 60,000 is still sitting in the Port Authority, so I need to move that over with the other remaining funds to the project fund. So that comes down to the 226. Carries forward to the next year, have some rental coming in, operating budget going out that we saw, that 98,748. A levy of 60,000 would end us at 215, or just about 216,000, I'm estimating. And then down below, this is just, we're just going to think out loud for a moment. These are the year number 2 dairy payments. We're talking in our tax levy committee about that because we said we'd pay cash for the first one. Then let's look at this second year, we would start levying the property tax on the statements. And of course, as a tax levy committee, we're always trying to find ways to think through the levy, minimize the impact any way we can. So one way would be, do we pay cash one more year out of a fund? Port Authority could be an option on that. And then really look towards the RFP process. Where do we go to try and get the property sold and developed, get the money in, pay off these loans, and try not to have much of a levy impact? Just thinking out loud, that's what we're talking about in the tax levy committee. So one would be your appetite as a Port Authority of using Port Authority cash balance for this. We would get down then to 128,000 in 23 and down to 114 the next year. So I don't have an answer for you, even what I for sure recommend yet, but I definitely can see the good side of not levying that if we think we can get some development rolling, which is, the concept all along, certainly. And if we look at our fund balance policy, this cash balance certainly is more than 40% of the operating budget that we would be supporting, because our policy for general fund and special revenue funds, which this is treated as special revenue. I really feel like I'm going in the weeds, and I'll stop shortly, but if we look at the policy, 35 to 40%, certainly with 128,000, we would be over that because we're more than the $98,000 budget. So what are your thoughts on that? Food for thought. And also the levy of keeping that stable. Are you comfortable with that after you look at this cash balance scenario?
I think the main thing is you being comfortable with, cash compared to what we need to have first, and the second thing is the marketability. When to sell the property to be able to pay it back. If there's no difference there, then it wouldn't matter if there's a big difference in waiting.
Yeah.
We want to wait. So I don't know how we can determine that, but that'd be the two things I'd be thinking about.
So I think, even as you say, comfort level with the cash, I'd probably be okay doing this, because if we ever had a shortfall here at the port, and this probably isn't even nice to say, but we'd have to help the port out from the city side anyway. For me, I really look at all this as the same. I mean, the port is we treat it as just another fund of the city, just like the library, but, so.
You have any questions for you?
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Just a couple of things thinking forward. I know we're going to talk about the Norgren property here in just a few minutes, and, the expenses involved with developing that, and Steve's request that we put something on the agenda to talk about shovel-ready sites. Do we think that we would have enough cash to do some of those things as well?
It would depend what that would mean to do shovel-ready sites and what kind of expense, where, 50, 80, so $80,000, $90,000, I bet, doesn't do much for us on shovel-ready. I think we'd have to come up with a bigger funding mechanism. Fair assumption, maybe, Brian? Anything shovel-ready means utilities and access and all that, right? So we'd have to come up with a major funding plan, I think, to make that happen. That's just my gut talking.
Okay.
Any comments on this side of the table?
Well, I'm in favor of us paying it with the Port Authority for another year, because I don't want anything going up on the levies, and I'm okay with the 60,000 carrying that over again this year. Because, I mean, we can't keep going to the taxpayers for more and more and more money. I mean, we've got it in the budget here, let's pay it, and then let's see what we can do about getting this dairy property sold.
I agree with Brent. I think that there's a short-term need to get something paid off, and the cash is there to do it, and we need to do it. But I think it goes back to the plan of just needing to Steve's comment of a more longer term, even with the Norgren, we need, how much is it going to cost in the long term, and then how do you have the cash to do some of those things?
What is the maximum we can levy, though? Because there is a limit, because obviously as we do these things and we kind of take, we're down to then 115,000, like this kind of study for Norgren is like 20,000. After this engineering, there'll be another one potentially, which might have a cost of another 20 to say 40,000. My concern would be, do we run out of the ability to levy and maintain then the cash balance of 40%?
I am
'Cause
thinking,
it doesn't give us, we don't really have we end up with 114,000, we don't have a whole lot of money then left to spend, on something,
I agree, and I think we talked about this last time, that we
Yeah.
weren't going to approve the Norgren engineering study until we had more information on what a whole project out there would look like, right? So that we can be planful
Yeah.
about this year, next year, and all the years to come.
so twofold, oftentimes with some studies, and this being preliminary, probably, could be appropriate coming from the port like we built it in. But if we get actually into design of the project and whatnot, we typically build that into the project cost, so we wouldn't take Port Authority cash balance for that. If we develop a project out there and if it's $1 million, say, we're going to think, maybe I'm low, I don't know, but Ryan can address that. But often all those design costs get built into that, and then we need to figure out how to finance those along with that, whether it be a bond issue and some special assessments. And of course, then there's tax levies that go with that. The 60,000, we're certainly not levying to our max. I'd have to calculate that, and I should have done that, but my guess, it could be, maybe 180, 200,000 now we could be up to. It's based on the market value. It's a certain percentage of the market value that a port would have the authority to levy, so it would max out. But certainly, even if you were double, I know we'd still be under the max.
Right.
But-
My concern was like, if we keep diminishing the balance, then, if we don't sell the dairy property, by 2024 and 2025, that's another 80,000, then, you're down to $34,000 in the kitty.
But,
So, I know that's not what we want to do, but
Well-
that's also a potential of what could happen.
but my concerns on going any higher is the fact is, right now, property values are going through the roof. Everybody's taxes are going through the roof. You got a lot of people on limited incomes, and then to turn around and levy considerably more than we got now, I got a serious problem with that.
And citywide, we will be looking at some levy increases because, of course, inflation, we're seeing all that too. We're in the process of building all that. We also, of course, have funding yet to come up with for the dairy. We're looking at that because we'll probably have a funding shortfall overall of the project of about 760,000 that we're going to have to, we've expended it out of the city fund, and we do have to come up with that. We're exploring those avenues. This all started with the Port Authority of transferring, the purchase agreement to the port. And do we ever talk about, should this ever go back to the city and have it in the city? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Because ultimately, we're working on that at the city side too, of how do we fund that gap? So it's just food for thought. I don't have any answers, but
So what's the timeline, I suppose, on making a final decision recommendation to the council on the 60,000 levy?
Probably, we could actually do it. I'd like to kind of know where you're going, because I plan on presenting the budget to the city council on the first meeting in September 6th, I believe that is. Then the city council will actually adopt the preliminary levy at the second meeting, which is September 19th, is that right? Do I have the, Claire was going to look at a calendar, but it's the first Tuesday and then the third Monday. So technically, before that September 19th meeting, which, of course, you'll meet again on September 19th, but I will have the budget presented September 6th, so I really like to know before then, which means tonight, or then a short meeting, if we called the special meeting over noon or something to discuss that. We could certainly do that if you are all up to that.
Is there a reason why we can't make that decision tonight? Do
No,
you need a
I mean, if
motion to approve the
everybody's-
60?
I mean, if everybody's everybody's agreeable to 60,000, then we can make the decision tonight, but, I mean, maybe do we want to talk about the other two things and then come back from the budget? Because that, what happens on the Norgren and the dairy property may affect that or not.
You sure can, we can,
And Steve's kind of, shovel-ready discussion.
Yeah.
Because all of those things have implication of costing money.
together.
So, right. The next item, we'll come back to you, Bill, we'd hate to leave you hanging, but the next item is the
Don't
Norgren.
forget to act on it, though.
Must. Just.
Bill. Right. Would you like to talk about the Norgren engineering?
Well, I can reintroduce it, and then Brian is with us tonight to answer some more technical questions. We started this discussion at the last Port Authority meeting. We received a proposal for a preliminary engineering report to help identify a utility plan for the Norgren property, the platted portion of the Norgren property, which, as you may recall, is available for housing development. It has been sitting basically untouched for many years now, just sort of sitting on the Port Authority's books. One discussion that we had many meetings ago was what does the port want to be doing, and housing was a focus at that point. So our engineering department, Brian, our city engineer, is here today, reached out to a local engineering firm who presented you with the preliminary report option that could help us make some determinations on what a utility plan would look like, how much it would cost, and then we could talk more about the development of that site. But from our last meeting, we had wanted Brian to come and just talk a little bit more about what that process actually looks like when a plan is in place. And then I think Bill had wanted maybe Brian to give an overview of what a project looks like from a city perspective, so that we can talk a little bit about funding mechanisms, et cetera. So, Brian, I think you also had an exhibit that I don't know if we can pull up because we didn't receive it in time, but hopefully we'll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Port Authority. Yeah, here I think believe it was introduced here last Port Authority meeting, was a professional service proposal from Interstate Engineering. I'm not sure to have the exhibit included, but I do have some handouts for the subject property, if that's all right. So yeah, I'll just go briefly over the scope of work prepared by Interstate Engineering based on my understanding of what the work was. Interstate Engineering is proposing to do create some preliminary grading plan, which will include some hydraulics for permanent stormwater management, which is a requirement. They'll also do some preliminary water, sanitary sewer, and storm sewer layouts for this project, and create preliminary road plans with profiles as well, just for geometric standards. Once that's all complete, they'll provide engineers' estimates for probable construction costs for this infrastructure improvement program. That has yet to be determined how, but I imagine with a lot of the projects and everything, all the preliminary costs can be broke out according to funding sources as well. So they're requesting amount compensation of not to exceed $20,000 for this work and everything. So I'll open up to any questions you might have.
questions of Brian?
I mean, this is typical, right? This is something we'd want to do to be able to understand the effectiveness if we move forward, right? So I'm looking at it just money well spent, isn't it, to determine where we're headed?
Yes, I would agree. One thing I'd like to note, if it is going to be potential for special assessments, the typical process for statute 429 is to do a preliminary engineering report, which is somewhat consistent with what you have here. However, there is a few extra additional statements and disclaimers, and there's some procedural steps we have to take in order to get those. And preliminary engineering report will also prepare preliminary assessment roles as well. But that's just one thing I'd kind of like to comment, but,
So this does include that?
pardon me, no, it does not.
Does not?
It does not.
So why wouldn't we do that?
I guess if that's the course of action, then I would kind of suggest we can, I'm sure their fee would not change too much and everything, but like I said, that was based on my understanding of the request. This before you is pretty much a component of the preliminary engineering report, but it's not the full preliminary engineering report.
I think the goal is to understand what we need to do to move this from being a field to a housing development.
It'll get you costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, procedural, if you do propose as part of the funding for 429, those are some of the steps we will have to do. It's preliminary engineering report. So this work, I guess, could be modified and prepared in preliminary engineering report format.
So that was going to be my question. If we do move ahead with this as is, we can still add on those other components that would then make it eligible for 429?
Yes.
Okay.
And that would just be a paperwork issue in the...
Typically, yes. Yes.
I mean, in the sense, but is there a reason why we wouldn't do it?
Right.
As opposed
That was
to...
going to be my
just
question.
so that we're ready, because I think the goal is to keep moving, so...
Yeah.
I mean, we don't... If there's 4 steps to get to where we need to go, how many steps can we accomplish?
Well, the first step would be the initiation. Like I said, I talked to the city attorney. Your first step with the 429 is to initiate, and being its governing body, there's a supermajority that has to pass a resolution to initiate, and then thereby ordering the preliminary engineering report would be at that step. So, not saying we couldn't proceed with this, but that's just an option. We'd have to do the initiation of it.
Right. I mean, do we want Brian to go back and ask Interstate a revised cost of the 20,000 if it's a 429 project rather than doing what we're doing and then adding on?
I think so. I mean, isn't the goal of the Port Authority to housing? I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't do all of it.
I mean, I think everybody agrees there's a market for it, right? That's the
Yeah.
first place to start. That's gone, that's agreed on. So then these things, I look at the list, it looks like it just, basic things that need to be evaluated.
Correct.
And we'd add on this other piece later if we needed to, right? And you're watching what they're doing, so if they, if it's a little bit under or whatever, you're on top of that, and then we'd add this other thing
Yeah.
later with a separate scope of work, right?
If specials would be used to finance a portion or all of this project, we would start the 429 process at that point.
Yeah, because
Could
to
you repeat that,
revise it,
Brian? Could you repeat that?
If special assessments was the full funding source, partial or full, then we'd move to that process of initiating and then ordering a preliminary engineering report, taking the information deliverable from this and then modifying it into a preliminary engineering report and following sequential steps.
Could you see a reason why there wouldn't be special assessments involved with this project?
No.
I think that's a really good question because it's like I just need some guidance on the order and steps that you take because if we're not going to use special assessments or we're going to assess all the multitude of ways to pay for development, then do we do the special assessment? Add-on? Yes. So I just need a little more, I need to pull back a little bit and say, okay,
suppose
what's
this
the
is-
normal process to assess a property and move these things along?
Bill, you...
So I'm going to think out loud again, just with that. And Brian, help me out here. It might be a Rolf question because, so this is Port Authority property that's owned. Now you know where I'm going to go. Normally, these are city projects that we do, but would, granted 429 statutes are going to fall whether it's a port or a city, and would we do it under the Port Authority? I mean, we would be putting in city water and sewer lines and city streets. See where I'm going? We have two organizations, and so I think we'll want clarification from, which won't impact the report.
No.
If we do this report, and if we were to then bring it the full distance to the preliminary engineering report, it really should, if it's another $3,000 or $4,000, if we do it now or do it, have them finish that up later, do you expect, would it be more cost coming back or about the same either way?
I don't anticipate, the area's platted and everything, so the linear footage is how we do per our 6-month policy. It's already established, so, and on the previous projects too, I've had them request they break it out, assessment rolls and everything.
But the other question would be, if, to get to the 429, would that be putting in cost? Because if this first phase says there's, 2 miles of pipe and, et cetera, maybe we don't need that next stage until we know we're closer to the time, because a foot of pipe today is one cost, and a foot of pipe in 18 months' time could be another.
Correct. And with the scope of work provided by Interstate that was in the original proposal, I don't have it in front of you, this is in consideration what their agreement is for pretty much the entire platted site. Could be done in phases too as well, but that's to be determined as well. I think it's probably up there about 35 lots. So if the first phase was consistent with maybe half those lots, as long as ingress proper access is there, that could be one way to approach this as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to do it. We do the platted lot as opposed to half of it. I think that would only complicate it.
So a brief description for Bridget's question, with special assessments. So just at a very high level, the governing body initiates a project, says, yes, we're going to look at this. You could do special assessments two ways. One, the governing body saying, we want to initiate it. Or you can have a group of residents petition and say, we want a street in here, please look at this, and then it would come. And then we do this assessment, do the preliminary engineering report, come back, and then we hold a public hearing. So that's, and especially for bonding, you have to hold that public hearing. So that's what gives the governing body authorization and to issue bonds for that you'd finance with those special assessments. But does that answer your question a little bit?
Thank you.
Okay.
So, boiling it down then, the 20,000 for this study is the right thing to do at this time. We all agree?
Yes, but we have to know that, it's pretty much, we're gonna eventually have to do the special assessment part on that.
Yep.
So is that a conversation that you have with them, saying it's probably coming down the chute, or?
I can speak with them on that. I don't oppose it as, this is just number one. My understanding was identifying costs.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes if there's a developer on board and developer's agreement or however that may be, if special assessments, at 100%, then we can break them out accordingly. I don't envision that'd be a huge expense. It'll be a necessary expense if 429.
Right.
So if the funding's not determined at this time, then I would suggest with the proposal as it stands to proceed and then have those conversations at that time. If it seems feasible and not cost prohibitive, then we could initiate and then move to the preliminary report.
Okay.
Large information of this information would be used in that report. It would just be expanded a little bit to include those assessment rules.
Okay.
Any other questions of Brian? If not, then does somebody want to make the motion to give the go-ahead to do?
So moved.
Thank you, Steve. The engineering report for the Norgren property. And
Second.
Thank you, Tom. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Hearing none, the proposal to use an interstate engineering for the Norgren property as approved. The next item on the agenda is the dairy site discussion. Over to Clara.
I don't have much for you on in the way of like a prepared discussion or anything, but we are continuing to keep it on as an agenda item so that we can look ahead toward the future. Where we've left it is that we did not get that 600,000 from LCCMR. So we are, in a way, back to square one with our identification for the site to have a trail and housing. We have rezoned it for housing, and I think the discussion that we should consider having right now is it time to reinitiate that RFP process so we can get this dairy property off of the rolls of the city / Port Authority and into the hands of a developer? And if so, what does that process look like, since our last process was not successful? So I will leave it at that and allow for discussion.
I mean, I think, at this point in time, obviously, the LCCMR grant is a city problem as opposed to a Port Authority, and the city will take whatever steps that they need regarding that. So the Port Authority owns the property in its entirety, all 27 acres. I mean, my feeling is that we should start the RFP process, and I think we need to look at a third party to actually put that together. I don't think, we have to get it out there in a more professional way to sort of reach a larger audience if we're going to sell the property. As part of it is time is of an essence too, because it seems like everything in local government takes way longer than we ever kind of would like. And so therefore I think, engaging somebody to help, and that doesn't mean to say that, people can't be involved, and obviously we'd still need people involved in the RFP process, but I think somebody to lead the discussion, start putting the materials together, and then, using this body collectively to review it is a far better way to go than trying to organize some subcommittee that then kind of just, and I think as well, if we hire somebody, there's more of a beginning and an end, and we can task them to get it accomplished by a certain date, as opposed to this going on forever. Brent?
I do got one question, though. When we broke off the section along the river for the LCCMR, we made it wide enough to accommodate the reasoning for the $1 million budget that we were going to pay on it. Now, since we're not going in that direction, if we do not have the $600,000 from the state, is there any way to scale back the thing along the river to make the portion that we're selling larger, to be a little bit more attractive to a developer and possibly bring in a higher price tag?
Larger or smaller could also be more attractive. Great, I'm really glad you brought that up, Brent, thank you. Yes, I think we should look at reconsidering the size of that parcel, because it was done to fit the specific grant requirements. I wish Brian had not left, unfortunately, because I think this would be something else that the engineering department can either help us with in-house or help us find a consultant who can do this work. But I do think we need to actually design a trail, or at least design the layout of a trail that can then be created or built upon, that matches the outline of the riverfront, fulfills certain size requirements for accessibility and use, etc. But then we can turn around and say, okay, we have a plan that we can move forward with, whether it be city, whether it be port, who's putting in the trail. But we could then have that as part of the RFP and say, and this is what it could look like in the future. So that could be another expense that the port maybe needs to take on, is some preliminary design work of a trail.
But then, can this be anything like what we were supposed to get from the Herzogs, where when they bring in all this landscaping work and they have all this equipment, it's probably a lot cheaper if we give certain concessions to have them, when they're doing their parking lots and everything else, to possibly put in the trail system. and, use that as a concession, and then by narrowing it back a little bit more, we'll get a larger price tag for it, because needless to say, the city's put in a considerable amount of money that needs to be reimbursed.
I think you're thinking of like the Thompson development, the River Oaks, where basically he put in a trail and we obviously did a tax.
We did a tax abatement to fund the
abatement
trail.
to fund it. But I think, what, as you say, minimizing kind of like, and so minimizing the amount of land we have to sell. and but
Narrowing it
also,
up a little bit to
yeah,
accommodate the trail and a few
And
other things.
maximizing kind of the usable land, but still maintain the trail.
Well, some of them, like if they're gonna put in big apartment complexes or something down there, they may need more green space, they may need more parking space, and it just makes it a little bit more attractive, a little bit more valuable, but allows for either bigger buildings or more buildings. And, maybe a developer might have said, well, here, this is a little bit small. If it's a little bit bigger, it might make it a little bit more attractive also.
And I think that's where looking at somebody to help put an RFP together might also bring some of that conversation into play and help with the ideas on it. So I think, sorry, Rebecca.
So Anthony, when you say a third party, are you suggesting a commercial realtor, or is that, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking of somebody that helps write RFPs for commercial real estate. I mean, property developers. I mean, somebody whose specific job it is to, write those things and go out there and help find buyers for it. I think, a professional group, that's their function in life, as opposed to trying to, burden staff with something that they don't do every day.
Where do you find such a group or individual?
I would say we direct staff to do that.
Okay. I like that idea.
My starting point might be checking with the consulting group who's helping us with our strategic plan. They represent a larger engineering firm, and just see if they have any contacts that would be the right fit, and then come back to you guys with some options and see what might be the right choice.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Then trail related, I think those are good ideas, different options.
Yep.
There's got to be other trails that have been redone or done lately that we could talk to, and is there anything else we're missing? Maybe not, but I don't know. Even Glendale 5 years ago.
Yep.
Did we get any feedback on problems with the RFP challenges, why people weren't interested or were?
Nothing that was ever officially submitted to me or asked to me directly, no.
So it was just sort of,
Just
there was nothing.
no feedback.
It would be nice to know, from a marketability perspective, what are they seeing that we are not? City demographics, general location, that would help us.
So, do we need a motion to direct staff to do that, or are we happy with just to direct staff in the minutes to do that?
I think we just asked nicely.
I think that's nicely, right? Thank
The
you.
minutes, right?
Jill making that.
The next item on the agenda is shovel-ready sites. Steve, do you want to lead that discussion?
Yeah, so, not a big ask here, but we had the discussion back in February regarding, staff availability to do different things. We talked about from a work plan perspective, we want to focus on housing and then the dairy property. And that's good. And I guess what I'm wondering, is there a different version of this shovel-ready site analysis that we should do? It doesn't have to be a full, certified shovel-ready. Seems like we're going from, well, we're not going to do any of it, or just this larger, work. Could we just do some analysis to determine what are the things, I don't know, top 5 things, top 10 things that developers look for, and just know those things, and we could talk about them as a group, and then, what does it take to get maybe those top several things? Is there a place in those top 5 things where if we had the top 2 in all of those sites, we would be marketable enough? Or not? And maybe it comes back, we don't do anything, but I feel like we've got a big gap there. There may be an interim thing that we could do.
Maybe we have to kind of look to Greater Fergus Falls to help identify what the top 5 things are, and then see whether we have properties that can fit that?
I think that would be,
Or,
Yeah.
you know, or what we'd have to do to the properties.
yep, it could be that simple
Get
as,
together with,
I think if staff get together with Natalia and,
yeah, it could be that simple, and then we just look at it again here, and
yeah.
is it $0, is it 50,000, is it 5 million, and go from
Because
there.
we don't have that many properties.
I was gonna say, do you have specific properties in
I
mind?
mean,
Nope, nope, just in general, should we be doing?
because, I mean, the only commercial property we have is up on the Quality
Just-
Circuit.
Well, we do have, well, Progress Drive is already shovel-ready. We have the site that's owned by the racetrack for commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep, we can
Right.
certainly do.
Okay.
no, that's all I have on that,
Right, thank you.
thanks.
Then the last item on the agenda is to approve the $60,000 levy for, unless we want to add, unless anybody's had any thoughts between when we started to now. If not, then somebody like to make that motion. Thank you, Brent.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Bridget.
Could you re-explain it for us in a couple sentences, please?
So basically, the Port Authority would be requesting of the city to continue with the $60,000 levy for the budget year 2023, which would reflect no increase from the present budget.
Thank you.
So,
and then maybe you want to just tack on there too, and then approving the proposed budget as we have it put together as well, because that'll roll right into the city's budget as well.
Do you need more clarity? Do we need to do a separate movement to say that?
Yeah, let's do a separate movement on that, since that's not in there.
so this
I
is
got it.
to approve the budget and to approve the levy. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. The budget and the levy are approved. And then, Bill, you had one other thing?
Well, Clara brings up a good point of, when we talked about if we use that cash balance to make the year two's dairy payments, if you're comfortable with that.
I'll make that motion to approve using the cash balance. for
Okay.
Dairy
Thank
payments.
thank you,
Second.
Bridget. Thank you, Steve. So we're basically, we have a motion to approve using cash balance to make year 2023 payments on the dairy.
And then move that into the budget as well, because part of that will show up in the 23 now, and part of it in the beginning of 24. So
Right.
the budget, I just had you approve. Clara was a step ahead of me. That's good.
Okay, so, and to include in the budget. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you.
Are there any other items to come before the Port Authority this evening? If not, then we will adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
guys.